Hi everyone, thank you for sticking around for the afternoon. Who enjoyed that last balloon fight? That was awesome. We can see everything backstage, I'm just telling you right now, you all looked amazing. So I just wanted to check, who in the room loves sport? Any sort of sport? Oh, all the hands, awesome, love it. Anyone here in particular like soccer or NRL or AFL? Any netballers or hockey players out there? Chess players, anyone want chess? Love the chess players. Well, what I want to talk to you about today is I don't know if many of you understand what goes in behind the sport, the science that goes in behind the sport. Sometimes the teams just don't go out on the field and just go, oh, we've got a set move, let's just throw the ball around and see what happens. There's a lot more that goes on behind the scenes to help the players understand how they can achieve their peak performance while they're on the field, and a lot of other things that go on behind that. So to help us understand what that looks like and what's involved, I'd like to help me welcome Sheehan, who's from the Sydney Swans.
Thank you.
So Will, tell us a bit about your role at the Swans. What does that look like and what do you do?
Yeah, so I work primarily in the sports science and conditioning department at the Sydney Swans. And obviously a big part of my role is looking after the large amount of data that we receive, both from training and competition matches. And we're trying to my role is to primarily take that information and take that data and try and make it useful as possible for coaches so they can then use that to inform decisions and hopefully win games.
So we saw earlier today, Yamini spoke about storytelling and how do you tell a good story. What some of us don't know, and what we're uncovering more and more these days, is data gives you a lot of information that can actually help tell a story. It's just a different way of telling a story. So would you like to take us through the sort of information that you do in your role? What sort of data do you collect? And how do you use that data to help the athletes in your sport in particular, but potentially in some other sports?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I think there might be a video here. Sort of outlines a bit of my role from day-to-day basis and also match day. My name is Sheehan and I'm a GPS analyst at the Sydney Swans. GPS devices sit in the back of those red vests that you might have seen on some of the boys. The primary information we get from those are simply how far they're running in total, how far they're running at certain speeds, so we can look at whether they're jogging, sprinting or whatever it may be, and also looking at how many changes of direction and how many collisions they're involved with as well. It's a way the coaches can sort of monitor not only the players individually but as a team, how the team is progressing as far as their fitness or the amount of load they're putting on the team. So the coaches tend to use that information to plan ensuing sessions and ensure that they're building towards the season, and then in season ensuring that the boys aren't dropping performance or they're not losing performance or improving. The vests, which look a lot like sports bras, so the reason they wear them is it gets the GPS device nice and close to the body and means that it doesn't move around. So the GPS devices are pretty sensitive with the information they provide. So if it's sitting in the back of a jersey or sitting around loose, then you don't get accurate information from them. So I guess part of my role, or that what was sort of primarily conveyed there, was what you would consider the physical demand, so looking at how far players run, the distances covered at certain speeds, change of direction, collisions, jumps, all those sort of things. But also in my role, I'm also fortunate enough to look at the other different aspects of the game as well. So looking at the technical demand, so you know how many times the player's kicking or handballing or performing tackles, and also the tactical demand, so how are players moving relative to one another, who's passing to who, and what's the sort of influence of that information on performance. So in all sporting contexts, not just Australian football, we know that there's sort of an interplay between all these components, and that a change in one component can likely lead to a change in another. So we know that if an individual performs a lot more running than maybe they normally would do, then that could have a significant impact on their technical performance. So basically with my role or at the club where I come in is I try to analyse all these different demands and all the available information, and then try and provide that information to coaches in the most appropriate way so they can try and improve performance. So that video sort of gave us a good glimpse of the different physical demands and how we can or the bits of information we can get from that. So again, as I said, we sort of look at that to monitor training, so how much the guys are actually doing from session to session as well as in games, but also really importantly as well as in a rehab setting. So if you look at Jack Maybaum in the middle there, he's coming back from an ACL reconstruction, and really important with those sort of cases that you really closely monitor how much load or how much running those individuals are actually doing. From a technical perspective, as I said, looking at things like the number of kicks, number of handballs that the individuals are doing. Champion Data are one of the primary providers of statistical or technical data for the competition. They provide a whole range of different indicators, so there's about 150 variables that you can look at, anywhere from sort of handballs through to tackles through to marks or whatever it may be. And the last sort of thing, which is a little bit more novel or new in Australian football, are the tactical demands. So they're looking at sort of who's passing to who's really influential as far as those passing networks go, and sort of looking at how the teams spread out or how they move relative to one another during certain passages of play. And I guess, as I said earlier, trying to take that information, provide it to the coaches. So you've got Horse up the top there, who's sort of responsible for all the technical and tactical demands, I guess. And then you've got Rob down the bottom there, who's the conditioning coach. So trying to take the information, give it to those guys so they can inform their decisions, and then hopefully we end up winning a lot of games.
So that's a lot of information that you're getting from those GPS devices. Is that the only technology that you use to get that data?
The physical stuff, yes. So the physical and I guess spatio-temporal stuff, so looking at how far players are spread. Yep, the GPS are the primary devices for that. They're quite sensitive and do record a large amount of information. We use heart rate monitors as well with the players during pre-season, so actually looking at the response from their heart to certain loads or certain exercises. Each game there are coders that are watching the game and writing down every little statistical or technical thing that occurs. And then outside of that, there's a bunch of different machines or pieces of technology that they use for rehab and strength and conditioning as well.
So those coders that are writing down all those stats in the middle of a game, what does that then do? Do you feed that to the coaches who then make decisions? How does that then impact what's happening on the field?
Yeah, so basically there's someone up in a box with a set of binoculars calling things out, 40 to 23, tackle so-and-so. Someone's there clicking buttons. That gets fed straight to the coach's box, so it comes up on a screen for them so they can see essentially how those numbers are looking compared to the other team. And then we'll also look at that after the game in a bit more depth and see what sort of might have been important as far as winning or losing the game.
It's just an incredible amount of data. So for the planning, and so when you're training in between games for the week, so when you take the data at the end of a game and you give that to the coaches, the conditioners, etc., how do you break that data down to give it to them for them to form strategy, I guess? How does that work?
So basically we get information on a tenth of a second by second basis. So every second we're getting 10 pieces of information on their physical demand. So that's quite a lot of detail and probably not the most relevant thing for a coach to look at the end of a game. So basically we'll just look at sort of summary statistics at the most basic level. So looking at what a player did for that game and how that compares to maybe what they normally would do. And again, use that to help inform decisions. So if we look at the physical side of things again, if they've maybe done a little more than they're used to doing or they're way above the average, then they might sort of pull them back a little bit the next week at training as far as the running goes. Or conversely, if they haven't done enough and they've been a bit lazy in the game or whatnot, they might push them a bit more.
So that's then used also for the well-being and health of the players. So someone was coming back from an ACL injury, if someone's done too much. So that data can help in how they can plan the recovery of a player. Is that what you're saying?
Yep, absolutely, yeah. So as I said, players come back from injury can be quite a sensitive or vulnerable time for that athlete. And sort of having that sort of technology and that information available helps take a lot of the guesswork out of what you're doing with that athlete.
Incredible. It's also a huge amount of data that is stored for an individual. So there's a lot, we saw, the cybersecurity gentlemen were here. One is the former director of the CIA, and so we know how important data is and data protection is. With these players, that's a lot of personal information that's coming out of this data. So what do we do in Australia, I guess, versus elsewhere in the world about that data and protecting that data? Because surely there's rules around that sort of thing now?
Yeah, there definitely is. I mean, Australia's probably at the forefront as far as sports science goes and actually having access and being able to use the data. the players in the AFL, for example, when they sign their contract at the beginning of the year, they are in that contract that would essentially give permission for third-party providers to collect this information and then provide it to their own club and also other clubs. And then that means that we have access to that and we can analyse that and use that to inform decisions. Other countries aren't as, forthcoming with allowing that data to get out. If you look at sort of the NBA or the NFL over in America, while in Australia players they have to wear the GPS devices, it's mandatory. Over there it's not, and quite often players don't like wearing those GPS devices because they feel that might be used against them when it comes to re-signing.
So in Australia, if you do not want to sign that contract, you won't have a contract with the Swans, for example.
Yeah, you won't be competing in the AFL league.
That's fascinating. And how have you found this data to be? I can only assume everyone's quite competitive at that level. How have you found the data either inspires or otherwise for some of these athletes?
Yeah, I mean, being at the level that they're at, they're extremely competitive, and they probably wouldn't be where they are without having that competitive edge. And quite often you'll see after a training session, when you put the report up on the board in the gym, a lot of players will get around and sort of say, oh, okay, how much speed did I cover at this, how much distance did I cover at this speed, or how many times did I reach this speed, or how many tackles did I make in this session, and they'll get a little bit competitive about it. And quite often, yeah, it sort of helps fuel them, and they sort of know what they're looking for. But also, again, there's the other aspect in that they're trying to use that to help improve their own performance. So their coaches have a good idea about where they want to see them be within a game, and if they know that, they can then train and work towards that.
Has the data, I guess, they're obviously very uber competitive, has it been used in a negative sense where they've tried to achieve too much and it's kind of gone against what we're trying to use the data for?
Yes and no. I think it's more like AFL is an incredible, complex game, and there's so much that goes into winning a game as far as the technical and tactical and the physical, and all influences one another. So honestly, during a game, players won't be overly conscious about what they're doing running-wise. They're probably going to be more focused on the game. But there's one example, I guess, sort of the back end of last year, one of the players ran 17 Ks throughout the game, and that was sort of his benchmark, and he was trying to sort of hit that for the rest of the game. But I don't think it has too much of a negative impact, just because I don't think they're so much conscientiously thinking of that too much.
That's a huge amount.
Yeah, it's nearly half a marathon in one game. That's with kicking, passing, tackling and jumping as well.
Let alone what they do in the week in training leading up to it.
Exactly, yeah.
So with this data, I know that from AFL, and you specialise obviously in AFL, there's a specific skill set, so 360 turns, running. For other, sports that people in the audience might like, NRL or those sorts of things, it's a different skill set, isn't it? So how can this data help them track the different and make sure the skill sets are going? So straight running for NRL, like the forwards just run forward. How does that help with the different sports?
Yeah, again, you get a whole bunch of information from those GPS devices, and it's up to your staff to take what's useful out of that. As you said, in things like or sports like rugby league and rugby union, you're probably going to be more conscious on the impacts and how intense those impacts are. Also looking at straight line velocities and straight line running. Soccer's quite similar to AFL, and they're both 360 in nature. You can go forwards and backwards, kick long, kick short, and whatnot. And again, you'd be looking at what's specific to that sport. And then again, if you're looking at other pieces of technology, sports like cricket, where running's probably not as big a aspect, but there's a lot more sort of neuromuscular or biomechanical strain on the body.
Well, endurance, some of them are out there for hours in the heat. So, and I don't know if you know much about the cricket, I'm a fan, of how does someone like a Steve Smith, who could be at the crease for hours on end, how does that help track what he's doing and then the recovery for that, I guess?
So I guess, again, it probably comes down to the athlete and what they're used to, what they've been exposed to, and what they're capable of. And again, probably not too dissimilar to what you would see in our AFL context, in that if a player has done a lot more than they would normally do, then they might be sort of pulled back a bit next week, or they might spend a bit more time in the ice baths and foam rolling over the next couple of days, just sort of help get them back to where they need to be.
Incredible. You said Australia was at the forefront of sports science globally. Is that because we have this data, because in AFL they have to sign up, and I'm not sure if that's the same in the other codes. And how is it that we are that strong in sports science in Australia?
I think it's just a cultural thing. and looking at the cultural differences between the sports. Australia, we've generally been competitive as a nation, but I think the aspect's been, or the approach to it's been positive, and that we're using this information to try and improve players and improve performance. Whereas other countries where it might be more money focused, for example, there might be sort of more of an emphasis on this might be used against me. So I think the attitude of Australian sport and just the sort of people that we are has meant that it can flourish.
Get in there and give it a go.
Exactly.
Yeah, you can have all my data. No one needs it. It's all
Exactly.
good. So for anyone in this room, for example, that might be thinking, love sport, what have you, sport or not, but data science, so you're an analyst, you analyse the data. What is it that helped you become a data scientist, and what is it about your job that's interesting or different that we may not know that you'd like to uncover for us?
As far as getting into this role, I did a sport and exercise science degree at UTS, then did an honours degree, and then into a PhD. And that was sort of focused around quantifying the different demands of the game. A lot of different sports would look at these components individually, but not necessarily as a collective. And as we know, there's a relationship between all those components and performance, so it's not much use just looking at one without the other. I personally, I'm very fortunate that I get to look at all different aspects. So, the conditioning coach is primarily focused on just the physical side of things, whereas your technical, tactical coaches are focusing more on the skill side of things. But I guess being in the position that I am, I get to have I get to liaise with all those different coaches and get a bit of a versatile experience.
So you're across the whole team and what everyone's doing.
Yeah, exactly.
And with the data that you get, do you get to make recommendations to these coaches, or you just present the data in a certain way, or how do you present the data for them? Is it just in paper, or can you talk to them through the data to help the athletes and in the end strategy to win a game?
Bit of both. The head coaches, the skill, John Longmire, Brett Kirk, John Blakey, they're all ex-footballers themselves, and they're in those coaching positions for a reason. They've got very good gut feel and instincts when it comes to making the right decision. So basically with those individuals, you're just trying to give them information that'll either support what they're already thinking or might just, provoke a bit of thought for them to, think, oh, maybe we could do this differently, or that's interesting, maybe we should try this. As far as the physical side of things go, so during a game I'll be on a laptop monitoring how far the players are going. And again, if I see a player jump up or doing more than they normally would, then I'll make a suggestion that maybe we pull that player off and put someone on, give them a bit of rest. So mainly it's primarily just giving them the information, maybe a thought or two with it, and then let them make the final decision, because they're there for a reason. And
that's what they get paid to do.
Exactly, yeah.
So a couple of questions. Last question is around the technology. So we've mentioned the GPS trackers. If someone in the room wanted to look at what sort of technology is coming down the line that we may look to, your company or whoever else, whatever team, what other technologies coming down the line in sports science that you would love to see, or we'd love to see invented, that will help your data analytics or the data scientists help these coaches to form strategy? I
think at the moment, as far as the GPS and tracking where players are going and what they're actually doing is at a good point now. I think sort of the next stage or next level is looking at what's happening inside the body in the least invasive way possible. So, looking at sweat rates, or actually looking at muscle damage as it's occurring, or actually seeing how much load or how much force someone is enduring during a game. Because at the moment, all we're sort of looking at is, running and, how many times the player has a tackle, which gives you a good idea about what they're being exposed to, but you don't actually know what is happening inside the body and what influence that's having directly on that.
Microchips or anything at the moment?
Not at the moment.
Something to invent, kids, something to invent.
Exactly.
Well, that's it. That's all we've got time for at the moment. So thank you so much, Will, for helping us understand more about data science and storytelling with information and data. And we'll see you later. Thank you very much.